Hi, folks. Today we're going to introduce the ancestral nostalgic connections. Now, I suppose all ancestral connections are nostalgic, but in a sense that people need to maybe sometimes need to find the story behind the relative, the connection, whatever. So basically, I'm just going to give a little brief overview of how what happens in family history in terms of how to trace um, relatives or cousins, be it they home or away. Now, the whole question behind um, finding out or searching is asking leading questions. I'll show you a chart here with the, if I can find turn up the right way. Leading questions, the who's and the hows and the whens. So you're asking questions where you're going to get a direct answer as opposed to a yes and a no. So essentially, if you're asking your aunt or your uncle or grandmother um, questions to find out uh, who the connections are, you have to ask leading questions. And what are the type of leading questions? Essentially, before you go to computers and internet, you get as much local information as you as is possible because that's a better platform to start from. So basically, if you get the aunt or the grandmother in a kind of a snug or a nice quiet time that suits them to that they'd be comfortable asking a question, maybe give them a whiskey to um, get them going. But essentially, it's you're trying to sometimes you're asking of a person that may not have a great memory, but you may have to ask the same question in a different direction to get the same answer or the answer you want. So you're like asking like what county did your mother's ancestors come from? Where did your mother's ancestors come from? Where was your father born? Do you know where your father's mother, your grandmother on your father's side was born? These type of questions to try and get a handle on. And in that, then you're trying to maybe get a handle on dates, approximate dates from which you can go onto the computer and find more or find it through the genealogist because sometimes this information isn't freely available, um, and particularly through the church. To the churches now are so defunct of priests that they haven't the time to communicate with aspirants of to find their roots. So essentially, as I said, get as much local information as possible from the people you think will give you the most information, and you start from there. And essentially, when you're at that level, then you you move on to say church records, um, civil records, and the census. The census, which we have in Ireland, are the 1901 and 1911. The previous censuses were all burnt in the Four Courts in 1922, which was a great pity. So that meant that all our 19th century census records are virtually gone, except for burned fragments that blew out the window of the Four Courts and blew onto the street. And there are certain parts of the country where these fragments were recordable, particularly in County Laois and parts of County Cork. But essentially, we're looking at the 1901-1911 census. And when we're looking at that census, it gives a lot of good information. One interesting part of that was that in 1909 the pension came in. So while people might be slow about giving their true ages in the 1901 census or maybe give a low age, they certainly increased it for the 1911 census to show that they were eligible for a pension. So basically, to get a pension, you had to be 70. So most of these people in 1909 had to be born in 1839 or before that. So many people had to go and try and check their um, baptismal certs if they could find them, or some people just went to their census of 1841 um, and showed their age at the census, and that was enough to get them on the pension fund. Um, but again, at that stage, people tend to overestimate their age to avail of the pension. Now, one question that comes up quite a bit is, the value of DNA testing, and it is quite valuable. But again, I think used in conjunction with the paper records that one can find. Now, what is it valuable for? It is valuable for if you have an unsolved mystery about adoptions, rushed marriages, or hushed up relationships. This is when the DNA kind of comes to the fore. And also, if you want to see if genealogy stands up to scrutiny, it's another valuable check to prove that the paper records may be correct or incorrect. So it is best at disproving blood relations than actually proving blood relationships. And it is also helpful in detection of or the birth of a child with developmental or physical problems. So, like it can check some of the genetic disabilities that could be around. So, basically, also in DNA testing, one can find a new sibling or find a new parent, because parents weren't always of the married connection, so they were important in that area. Now, another area that's probably a thorny issue is adoption. Adoption only became law in this country in 1954, and firstly the former health boards and the Adoption Society of Ireland, they may be able to give you information as to whereabouts of lost relatives, because many getting into the workhouses and that may not have had proper records. Immigration is another area that a lot of our ancestors had to go down that route, and particularly to the English-speaking world. And there is a number of sites that one can visit, particularly the Ellis Island one, which will give immigrants from 1892 to 1924, and basically it will tell the name, first and last name, the year born, and the place name left, which can be valuable in the sense that sometimes you may not be able to find a parent here in this country, but you find a sibling who was emigrated, gives his name of his parents, and consequently you're able to track back the parentage of the person here. Also, when it came to the police and army records, the RIC records were pretty well kept, and they were, of course, kept in the National Archives in London from 1816 onwards. So if you had a relation serving in the RIC, it's possible for a paid fee to find out maybe more about that person. Equally, the Irish pension, the Irish army pensions, they were kind of more or less from 1916 onwards, and the pensions were awarded under the 1924 Pensions Act. So if one has no relation there, you can check with the military archives um, which is based in